أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. It's always nice to be here. Again, I thank the Maz admin for having given me this opportunity. But I'm nervous as usual. Usually I'm always the only male. Thank God the cameraman is also with me today again. The topic that I chose was conflict prevention and resolution. This was a lecture that I had given to the men in the holy month of Ramadan. One of the nights, not in the mosque, but a very informal gathering at Haydari Plaza, Batak, the Batak group, as you must have heard of them. The good thing was it was recorded, but I don't think it was formally circulated around. Some of you might have heard it, but there was no PowerPoint accompanying the presentation, and of course I slightly modified it. But even if you have heard it, there's no harm in repeating it, because conflicts are something that happen all the time. So the question comes up that why should we be discussing conflict prevention and conflict resolution? Of course, the reasons are very obvious. I've put down a few pictures here which would explain the different areas where we usually see conflicts. The first picture there on the left, top left, of course, is husband-wife. That is the most common area where we see conflicts happening. The second one, as the picture itself describes it or explains it, it's neighbors fighting with each other. These days, Dar es Salaam, the way it's changing, we have flats all over. So the distance between people is decreasing. So we live very close to each other, flats. So neighbors always end up having conflicts. The third one, I couldn't resist putting up this picture, the two hands, but it stands for community conflict within the community. Those fingers stand for the members of the community. So you have one side speaking, the other side which has to listen, and sometimes it's both sides speaking, nobody listening. So community conflicts that happen. And then conflicts at the office, very common. Now that stress levels are going up, increasing demands by the bosses, it leads to stress, and that thereby leading to conflicts in the office place. And of course, the last picture there is again self-explanatory. Political conflicts within countries. You have Donald Trump there and the North Korean president and Rouhani, the Iranian president. This is just a small example, but we have conflicts happening all over the place. So because of these conflicts, it's important for us to be able to discuss, and we should be discussing the sources of conflict, how to prevent them, and how to solve them as and when they occur. This lecture, I think, will just be a tip of the iceberg. I'm not going too much into detail. It's just to give you, it's just like planting a seed, and then you can go and read up on your own. But I'll just be giving you small tips because we don't have that much time to go into detail. And of course, conflict resolution is usually done with the help of a counselor or arbitration, but this is just a small seed, a small point of discussion which can be taken up then in detail. So the causes of conflict from the Holy Quran. So what I've done is I've taken verses that talk about Islah, peacemaking, and whenever you see a verse on peacemaking, obviously around it will be the sources of conflict. So Quran, Surah Nisa, verse number 128, which talks about the conflict between husband and wife. I haven't gone into the detail of the verse, but the few words that I use there, as I say, the sources of conflict. The word used there is nushuzan. Nushuzan, it's ill conduct or disobedience. So the wife is told either disobedience on the wife's side or disobedience on the husband's side. When they fail to live by the rights that are expected from each other, or they exceed the limits, or whatever they're supposed to do, they don't do it. So disobedience, ill conduct. And the other word there is shuha, which is greed. In the same verse, this word is also used, greed. And desertion. Desertion is ignoring. We call it stonewalling. In marital language, it's called stonewalling, the silent treatment. Men are known for this. Women, when they get emotional, they tend to talk, they want to talk out. Men, when they are disturbed, they give the wife the stonewalling effect. They just go silent. So desertion, and this could be a source of conflict. Women cannot stand this. When the man give them the silent treatment, the woman cannot stand it. So these are the Quranic sources from Surah Nisa, the sources of conflict. So ill conduct, disobedience, desertion, ignoring, stonewalling, ridiculing, and greed. This word is also mentioned within the same verse, Surah Nisa, verse number 128. And greed here, to me, it stands for ego. I deserve more than what you are giving me. I am something. Or on the other side, you don't give that person the thing that they deserve, the respect that they deserve. So it's both sides, demanding and giving less, demanding more, giving less. So here the Quran says, stay away from this because this is a source of conflict. One of the main sources of conflict in a marriage would be greed, asking for more than you deserve and giving less than what you should be giving. Sheikh Khalidina keeps on mentioning in his marriage sermons that the relationship is not 50-50, it's not 60-40, it should be 80-20, it should be 90-10. Take 10%, give 90%. That's where the success of marriage lies. But whenever we have greed, ego, Allama Tabatabai mentions very nicely, a little bit of greed is good because God has given us this small quality so that people know what their rights are. They become a little bit possessive, which is important. But when it goes out of control, that's where it leads to conflict. When he gives a commentary on the same verse. The other verse, the other surah that I saw where sulh is mentioned, islah is mentioned, peacemaking is mentioned, is Surah Hujurat. It's a brilliant surah. So many ulama have given commentaries. Allama Dastaghaib Shirazi has a commentary on this surah. I think Ayatollah Jafar Subhani, has a commentary on this surah. It's the basis of akhlaq. So many points within this surah. So sources of conflict again from this surah. Verse number 2, raising of your voice. The mu'mineen are told, don't raise your voice in front of the Holy Prophet. But it's not only in front of the Holy Prophet. Generally, raising your voice. So voice control is very, very important. Humans are very, very sensitive. The moment the voice rises, immediately it leads to some changes within the body. So when communicating, it's very, very important to maintain voice control, the rhythm, the tone, be very soft in talking. It's a sign of humility. So voice control, don't raise your voice. Verse number 6 of Surah Hujurat talks about whenever you get information from wherever, always verify or check for the credibility of that information. Not only that, but credibility of the person giving you that information. So the information itself, the content of the information, and the person giving you that information, is he a credible person? Most of our conflicts happen here. Just now with WhatsApp coming in, a small thing happens and stories just fly out. Whether they're credible, they're not, people are so excited in spreading it around. Within a short time, it just goes around the globe. And it's a big, big source of conflict amongst people. And later on, you realize that no, what was said was something else and what was spread around was something else. So credibility. In this day and age, whereby WhatsApp is the thing, we have to be very careful. Verse number 9 talks about lack of justice. So whenever this verse talks about that whenever you see two parties in conflict with each other, make sure you make sulh between them. So the hadith goes, there's a hadith of the Holy Prophet whereby he tells his ashab that, do you want to know of something that is greater than prayer, greater than fasting? And they say, yes, O Holy Prophet. And he says, something better than these two is bringing sulh between two fighting members, be it two brothers, be it two sisters of the community. Bringing sulh between them is better than prayers and better than fasting. Of course, it's not a replacement. Wajibat stays where it is. But I think it's talking about nafila, the extra prayers, the extra fasting. Better than that is bringing sulh. There's another hadith of the sixth Imam whereby he gives money to his companion and tells him that whenever you see two parties quarreling and if you have to use this money to bring peace between them, do so. I'm allowing you to use this money to bring sulh. The third hadith talks about lying. Lying is haram. But in case of peacemaking, if you feel that by lying is going to bring about peace and reconciliation between two parties, you're allowed to lie. But this verse also talks about justice. So when there are two parties in conflict, bring peace about them, but amongst them, but be careful. Don't compromise on justice. So see which part is, if there's a part that is oppressed, if there's a party that is oppressed, always stand on their side until justice is established. So it's not only about peacemaking, it's not passive. It has to be active, and peace has got to be restored, not at the expense of justice. Justice has got to be restored, and then only peace can be brought about. Verse number 11, which is another cause of conflict, ridicule. Contempt. Contempt is the ingredient which brings about breakages of marriage. Contempt, kudharao. In Swahili we say kudharao. You ridicule, masti karo, you are nothing. So in husband and wife talk, people amongst the community, I'm superior, you are not, based on racial basis, on religious basis, on color basis. So ridiculing other people, family background, you people are nothing. It happens so often. Quran says, verse number 11 of Surah Hujurat, ridicule, fault finding, actively looking for faults in people. We go, I'm talking about myself, even walking on the street and in the mosque, what we do is we have a habit of looking around. Asu peri che ne, asu nati peri ne, a kevi lage che ne, a kevo lage che. Fault finding. Calling others by nicknames, the same verse. Zanzibar was known for this. Everybody in Zanzibar had a nickname. Whether they liked it or not, now it's gone to the third generation. So the nickname was given to the grandfather. The grandchildren now are carrying the same name. In fact, when you use their original name, that people don't even know them. You have to mention huyu alikuwa hivi, alikuwa anajulikana kwa jina hii, bajia, sambusa, whatever. Nicknames. Verse number 12, suspicion, spying, and backbiting. This is all from Surah Hujurat. These are all causes of conflict. Just lack of trust, basically. You don't trust the other partner, you don't trust the other community member, or actively, to make yourself feel good, you try to look for faults in others so that it elevates you. So spying on people, suspecting people, and of course, backbiting. So these are ingredients which bring about conflict within a community. So this is from the Holy Quran. Of course, there are many more causes, but these are the two things two verses or two chapters that I looked into, which talk about Islah. At the same time, around it you'll see causes of conflict. So that is the Quran. Now we'll go to the secular books which explain these Quranic terms very clearly and in a nice, simple way in which we can understand. Quran, as we know, is very, very deep. It requires specialists. We need to go through commentaries. And whatever we know, it's not enough. There are different levels. Sometimes we have to refer to secular books which talks to our level of understanding. So there's a book called Conversational Intelligence by Judith Glaser. It's a nice book. on how to talk properly. So when we talked about Surah Hujurat, we talked about raising of the voice. These are all conversational skills. So in this book, she talks about conflicts, the main causes of conflict. So she talks about the human brain, the two parts of the human brain. There's one which is the prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of the brain. And then you have the amygdala, which is somewhere at the base of the brain. These two areas are very, very important. Prefrontal cortex is the decision-making center of our brain. The amygdala is the autopilot center of our brain, the emotional center of our brain. So Judith Glaser says that the main ingredient for conflict is trust and distrust. If you trust somebody, it brings about changes in your body, it puts you at ease, and there is less chance of you going into conflict with the other one. But if there is distrust, it leads to, there's a high chance of conflict erupting there. So, effects of trust. Whenever you trust somebody, be it husband, wife, by the way, the body has a capacity, the human body, she talks about this in her book. The human body has a capacity to sense trust or distrust from up to 10 feet away. So when a person is approaching you, from up to 10 feet away, the body has, consciously you might not be able to judge whether this person trusts me or not. But if there's some sort of suspicion between the two parties, the human body, even without the person himself knowing, has a capacity to know that something is wrong here. Automatically they go into that unease state. So effects of trust. It stimulates the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is the decision-making center. This is where relationships are made. So the main ingredient of a relationship is trust. What it does is there is increase in dopamine production. So the moment there is trust between two parties, it releases dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good hormone. It gives rise to positive feelings. Person gets excited and they're at ease. And they want to talk to the person. They want to build up a relationship with that person. It also leads to production of oxytocin, which brings about bonding. Simple ingredient, trust. Boroso, as we say in Gujarati. Kumu aminium tu, in Swahili we say. Serotonin is another substance that is produced. It's the happy hormone, the feel-good hormone. So if you trust a person when you're talking to the other person, be it a community member, be it a person at the office, be it husband, wife, sibling, trust is very, very important. When we deal with others with trust, immediately the body produces hormones and we feel good, we feel happy. And that's where Silatul Rahim comes in. Silatul Rahim, we are told, if you do Silatul Rahim, you live longer because it decreases stress within your body. Automatically you feel at ease, you feel good. Okay? On the other side, distrust. Distrust stimulates the amygdala. One of the first effects, it leads to formation of cortisol. Cortisol, the moment it's produced, it shuts down the prefrontal cortex. So if there's distrust, the decision-making center of the brain is shut down. So there's no relationship that's going to be formed. So when we're approaching somebody and we don't trust that person, or if we have some sort of shock, we have suspicion, or we're looking for faults in that person, or we talk to that person in a way that is not right, raised voice, rude words, it leads to formation of cortisol. Immediately the relationship making center is closed down. The prefrontal cortex is closed down because of cortisol. There's increase in testosterone. So immediately there's increase in aggression. So we automatically become aggressive, we become very defensive, and we just want to protect ourselves. Norepinephrine, it brings about negative thoughts. So simple, trust and distrust. And if we see all the causes that were mentioned in the Holy Quran, it all comes down to trust and distrust. You're spying on somebody, you're suspicious of somebody, you're backbiting somebody, you're fault finding in somebody, looking for faults in somebody. You raise your voice, information that comes in, you just spread it around without verifying. What you're doing is you're creating distrust. or disobedience in Surah Nisa. Disobedience or stonewalling, all these lead to distrust. There is no trust between the husband and wife. So these are causes from the Quran and from the secular aspect. Judith Glaser has done a lot of research, 20 years of research just on conversation. And she's written this book, if you can get hold of it. It's a slow read, it needs to be read very slowly, but there's a lot of information. Of course, it's mostly to do with marketing and advertising, but it has a lot of information which pertains to us, simple community members also. So, in case there is conflict now, we have got into a conflict. There's a book written by the Arbinger Institute. They've written some brilliant books. It's not a single author, it's a group of authors who've come together. So there's one book called Leadership and Self-Deception, and a continuation of that is called The Anatomy of Peace. So this table here, it's a fantastic table, the triangle, the strategy of peace. I just love this triangle because I don't know if you can read the details. I don't know if it's very clear. So the triangle, it says whenever there's a conflict, always follow this triangle. He says we have this habit that whenever there's a conflict, we try to correct the other person. He should be understanding, you know. So what we're doing is we're dealing with things that are going wrong. You should do this, you should do this, you should do this. But if you see in this triangle here, correct is just the tip of the triangle. Bulk of the triangle, the bottom part of the triangle, talks about helping things go right. So it's natural in a conflict. What we want to do is we want to correct the other person. But in this book, they mention, before you do that, it's important to start working on yourself. So the bottom part of the triangle, the base of the triangle, is get out of the box. Obtain a heart at peace. So in this book, they talk about a heart at peace and a heart at war. When a heart is at peace, you look at the other person like a human being. When you have a heart at war, everybody else is like an object. They're not humans anymore. That's what the book Leadership and Self-Deception talks about. So come out of the box. Consider that person to be a human, just like you. That person is not an object. Obtain a heart at peace. In Islamic language, we have the nafsul ammara and you have the nafsul mutma'inna. So Sheikh Jawadi Shomali, the son of Sheikh Shomali, he gave a very good lecture after the holy month of Ramadan. There were many points. One point he mentioned which I liked, and he narrates it from his father. So he gives an example. He says, if you take a bottle of water and you were to put sand at the base, initially when you put the sand, the water would become all murky. After a while, the sand would settle down. But every time you shake the bottle will become murky again. And then if you leave it, after some time, the sand again settles down. So he gives this example. He says that after the holy month of Ramadan, after all the amals that we've done, Laylatul Qadr, we fasted, spiritually we feel uplifted and we feel we've done so much for God and we feel very good. But come Eid, a few days after Eid, we start sinning again. We sin. And when you sin, because you are partially purified during the holy month, you feel really bad. On a normal day, if you were to sin, you would feel bad, but not as bad as after the holy month of Ramadan. You say, when I was fasting, all this did not happen. Now what's happening within me? So he says, yes, you should feel bad. You should feel bad. But at the same time, you should also feel good. Why? Because what has happened is that all this time you thought the sand has settled. But now when you sin, the bottle is shaken again and the water becomes murky. So that tells you that there's still sand within the bottle. So as much as you feel sad, but you should feel happy, there's some work still to be done. There's still work that needs to be done. With Ramadan comes pride and ujub and riyah, that I did so much. But after the holy month of Ramadan, when you sin, You feel sad, you feel bad, but at the same time you should feel good. Okay, no, there's still work to be done. It brings down your pride. So it's obtain a heart at peace. So he relates it very nicely to the event of Karbala. He says on the day of Ashura, all the Ma'sumin who are there, so be it Imam Hussein alayhi salam, be it Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, be it Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, or Hazrat Abbas, Hazrat Ali Akbar, all the personalities who were involved. That day was a day full of calamities. That means the bottle was shaken to the maximum, but never did you see the sand coming up, because the water was pure. After going through so much of oppression and dhulm, never did you see them taking a wrong step. That's the nafsul mutma'inna, the heart at peace. So similarly, when it comes to peacemaking, as much as we are disturbed within and we want to correct the other person, the first step is obtain a heart at peace. Get out of the box. The minimum you should be doing is consider the other person in front of you to be a human, not an object. The second step after the base, once you've done that, once you've started working on yourself, the way I see it, once you start doing that, anger just disappears. There's no conflict anymore. You just become at ease, But if it hasn't sorted out the problem, you go to stage 2. Build relationship with others who have influence. So the person whom you're trying to correct, you might not get to them straight away. Yes, if it's between husband and wife, that verse that we talked about of Surah Nisa says, Allah Tabai says, start addressing the problem when you see the smallest of symptoms of conflict. That's the time to sort it out. Don't wait for it to blow up. The initial stages, sort it out then. That's the best time to sort it out. But sometimes things go out of control, the conflict erupts, just becomes too much. At that time, to talk to the person whom you're in conflict with becomes very difficult. So building up a relationship becomes a problem. So before building up relationship with them, try to build up a relationship with people who have an influence with them. So I gave this example when I was talking to the men, like with my daughter. She's a teenager now, and naturally we've all gone through teenage ourselves, and we have children now who are going through teenagers. There's a lot of conflict going on within their minds, and you see them doing things that really irk you, that irritate you. So now I see my daughter doing something wrong, and I go and fire her. Why are you doing this? How are you thinking? And because she's a teenager, when she was a kid, she listened to me. But now, because she's a teenager, she rebels. You see? So there's breakdown of communication now. I do not understand what's going on through her mind. She doesn't understand what's going through my mind. So there's a conflict there. The best way to sort this out, of course, is to start working on myself. One, obtain a heart at peace. But start building a relationship with somebody else who has an influence. Of course, my wife is the best person. She's closer to my daughter than I am. So then I would go and tell my wife that what's happening? Can you do something? And maybe she would have a solution. So once that bridge is built, then you go to stage 3. Now build up the relationship. Before you correct, build up the relationship. If the relationship is strong, conflicts usually would not happen, because this is an area where what we're doing is we're trying to help things go right. So if there's a nice relationship, it will lead to lessening of conflicts. The step above that is listen and learn. Very important to listen. The diagram that we had, those two hands standing against each other, one talking, one listening. Most of the time that doesn't happen. Both of us want to talk. So there's no listening. Not only listening, but learning in the process. So when I see my daughter doing something, I have to listen to her, one. Not only that, but through listening, there's so much she has to teach me as a parent. So listening and learning. Then teach and communicate. So you have to teach her the instructions. I'm giving an example of my daughter. And communication intelligence again, conversational intelligence. Then we come to correction. So what you've done is you've built up credibility in yourself, you've built up a relationship, and now gradually you're communicating with that person, and you bring about correction. If we jump this process, we just go on correcting, things are not going to go right. So in this book, they mention the rules, the 3 golden rules which go behind this triangle. It says most of your time should be spent on the lower half of the triangle and not on the top part. So our members that we have in the mosque, or when we deal with our teenagers and with our youths, what we are doing is we are spending more time on the top part of the triangle. What we should be doing is we should be spending more time on the bottom part of the triangle. That is one. Number 2, solution to any level of the triangle is a level lower than where the problem is. So if there's a problem in, for example, building the relationship, we can't build up a relationship. So the solution to that is a step below. Build up relationship with others who have influence. If there's a problem in teaching and communicating, when we teach and we communicate and it's not working, the solution to that is to go a step below. Listen and learn. There's a nice TED talk by this guy who took a vow of silence. He remained silent for 17 years. It was his birthday, and he decided to remain silent for that one day. And he enjoyed it so much that he said, I'm going to remain silent. Not for one day, not for 1 week, not for months. He remained silent for 17 years. And what he did was he walked across the US. And in the meantime, he did his master's and he did his PhD, remaining silent. He taught a whole class, because when you're doing your PhD and you're doing your master's, you have to teach. So he said, I was teaching just by listening. The only time he talked was when a gun was pointed at him, because he went for a walk from North America into South America, and he lost his way, and he ended up outside some prison or some military barracks, and a person came up with a gun in front of him, and that was the time he had to talk. And that's when he started talking again, and he ended up giving this TED talk. So if you listen to his experiences, but just listening, very important. There's a lot we can do by listening. So the solution to a level of the triangle is beneath that level. And the last one is effectiveness of each level depends on the lowest level. So if our heart is not at peace, we won't be able to build relationships. If we can't build relationships, we can't listen and learn. If we can't listen and learn, we're not going to be able to teach and communicate. If you can't teach and communicate, we're not going to be able to correct things. This is a brilliant triangle. Now, keeping this triangle in mind, so what I did was just put God in this triangle, the way God deals with us. God, of course, is the ultimate peace. He is salam. So whenever you go back to God, He is the all peace-loving. Okay, He is always at peace, and all the source of peace is from Him. He builds relationship whenever He wants to communicate with us. He comes through other people. Either He comes through parents, He comes through ulama, He comes through books. He builds up relationship with people who have influence on our lives. He also builds up relationship with us directly. Of course, He doesn't need to learn, but He listens. Innahu sami'un alim. He listens. Whatever we say, and He tells us, pray to me, talk to me, I'm there to listen. He teaches and He communicates. And very rarely do you see Him correcting us directly. When you do something wrong, He gives us so much time. Even if you go through the Holy Quran, the instances where He's really corrected communities. So the Qawm of Fir'aun, you can count them on your fingers. Fir'aun, Qawm Lut, Ad, Thamud, and those Jews who were turned into apes. You can count them on your fingers. But bulk of the Quran is just teaching and communicating. Just read the Quran. God is communicating with us. So bottom part of the triangle. You keep the Holy Prophet in this triangle. The first 40 years of his life, it was just in the bottom part of the triangle. A heart at peace. He was building up influence. He was building up relationship. He was listening and learning. Even after prophethood, he taught and communicated. And through his akhlaq, immediately he brought about correction. and you put anybody of the Masum, any of the Masum. So, for example, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, you put him in this triangle. Those 10 years that he was in Medina, when he started his journey from Medina, those 5 months, so starting from Rajab, Sha'aban, Ramadan, Shawwal, Zilqad, Zilhajj, until Muharram, this is what was happening. He was building up influence, building up relationship, teaching and communicating. You go through his sermons, right to the last moment, he's teaching and communicating with the people. And then, of course, the day of Ashura, which I would say is the correcting part. So this is a brilliant triangle which we need to implement in our lives. I think it can become a good guidepost. If we follow this, I think it will enable us to build up better relationships with our spouses, with our children, with our neighbors, with our community members, with our people that we work with in the office, between countries, and between communities, between races. I think it's a brilliant model which I think is very Islamic also, and it follows Islamic principles. So hopefully I haven't bored you. This is just more of a copy-paste thing, but it's worth reading these 2 books, Leadership, Self-Deception, Anatomy of Peace. If you can get hold of these books. Not very big, and they've put it in a story form. So Anatomy of Peace, the whole story is about Camp Moriah. So it's a camp whereby they handle kids with troubles, in the sense, problematic kids, problematic teenagers. And the beauty about that camp is it's run by a Palestinian and an Israeli. There's a Jew and a Palestinian who've come together. They've opened this camp. So on one side, they keep the kids. On the other side, they educate the parents. Parents who've lost touch or have lost trust with their kids. So on one side, the kids are being coached. On the other side, the parents also being coached. So they put in a form of a story. I don't think it's a true story, but just to take the message through. So if you get a chance, this book is nice, conversational intelligence. And of course, we need to do more work on the Holy Quran, because it's full of messages. So I think this will be a task for Maz, because this is where everything bubbles out from. So we need to do more work and then spread it, inshallah, to the community. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.